Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm your co-host, Matt Bernico.
And I'm your other co-host, Dean Detloff, back fresh from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, where I did see Matt in the UK for a couple of days. Matt, how are you feeling? Are you back to normal? I guess you didn't have a time change or anything, but you did have to take the train.
I had to take the train far to the north. As it turns out, Scotland is a very long way from London. It's like a 5-hour train ride, and not a very fun one, to be honest with you. The trains were not running on time, so somebody call Keir Starmer and tell him to get on that one quick. Dean, what's your impression of being in England, being in London? Let's see, you were there for a bit longer than I was. Did you see the King? Did you see Parliament? What are you thinking? What are your feelings?
Yeah, I didn't see the King.
Can I get a review on London?
Yeah, for sure. I didn't see the King. I didn't see Parliament. But I think for the better. I think that's why it was a good trip, actually. I didn't do anything touristy except all the fun stuff, which we did together. We saw Karl Marx's grave. We saw where Karl Marx wrote Capital in a big, old, weird library that is coincidentally inside of a museum now. We saw, coincidentally, Matt didn't do this on purpose, but it was extremely funny. Matt booked a hotel, and it turned out to be on the same site where Lenin had lived in exile at some point prior to the revolution. That was extremely funny to find out by accident. We went to Freud's house. I feel like we just saw all kind of the weirdest stuff that you could see. That was great.
A real who's who of the 19th century thinkers in London. Yeah, it is pretty surprising that Lenin did stay in the same travel lodge that we did. That's pretty cool.
The breakfast there definitely radicalized him.
He ate the beans on toast and said, no, back to Russia, down with the bourgeoisie. We got to get the situation sorted out, said Lenin. Yeah, man, it was a great trip. I think, okay, here's a recommendation. If you, dear listener, ever find yourself in London, just go to the Freud Museum, because it's pretty wild. It's out of the way. It is a hike, but it is basically just a house. And it's all about how Freud was an actual real human person. And that's kind of it. And I love that kind of stuff. Man, it was so cool to see his house and his couch and his glasses, and there's a cat, but it wasn't Freud's cat. It was just sort of a cat that lived outside. But anyways, this is my glowing recommendation to go to the Freud Museum. It's very fun.
It's very fun. It is kind of startlingly not very secure in a way that I really appreciated. I mean, you shouldn't touch the stuff in the Freud Museum, but man, you really could. We went to the bathroom in what I can only assume is Freud's actual bathroom. That was kind of disconcerting. We saw some home movies narrated by Freud's daughter. Just a wild place all around.
The home movies narrated by Freud's daughter, though, are so funny because they are literally just home movies. It's just his daughter, and she's obviously very old when she's like narrating these, but she's like, oh, there's my dad and his favorite dog. And like, that's it. Okay.
That's right.
Great stuff.
I'll say one thing about London in general, is that it did have a severe lack of bone churches. And I do think that going to the UK after going to Rome was a pretty big mark in the pro column for Catholicism, if you ask me. Rome, an extremely weird, bizarre, absurd city full of crazy stuff. London, also extremely bizarre and weird, but not for the same reasons. However, we did go to one bone church, which was the Museum of Natural History, which I would say is the bone church of Richard Dawkins. And I got to tell you, not as cool as our bone church.
No, it wasn't quite as cool as the human bone church, but the big blue whale that you get to see there, I think is great. I love that thing.
That was cool. And they should find a way to get that inside the bone church in Rome.
There's no rules against it.
There you go. That's our travelogue report, the travel blog, the Magnificast blog. But we're not talking about that for the next hour, unlike the Bone Church. We're quarantining the travel blog starting now. And instead, we're talking about the thing we promised to talk about before I left to go across the ocean, which is the new Pope. We've got a new Pope. He's from Chicago. He's just like us. He speaks English like a guy that you could meet at your church bake sale. An extremely normal guy, except that he's not, because he's the Pope. And we're jazzed about it. He's been the Pope for a while now, weeks even. And he's had an opportunity to start maybe showing a little bit of what he's about, what he's doing, what he's going to say, but also he's shrouded in enigma and a great screen to project all the hopes and fears that all of us continue to have about Catholicism in the world. And it's been a blast. I love watching Pope takes. I love trying to figure out what people think about the new Pope. And I guess we're going to do it together in the next hour. Figure out what we think about the new Pope.
Yeah, that sounds good. I was at right before I was in London, I was in a work event in Liverpool, of all places. Home of the Beatles. We love it. And one of my workmates brought up the new Pope as just a thing to talk about, and they didn't realize that was my special interest. So I did unload my Pope knowledge on them, and then the rest of the week when I was there, everyone kept being like, "Oh, Matt, he knows a lot about the Pope." That's kind of how I was introduced to a few people. So that's pretty cool.
It's a pretty good brand in your labor union.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's good to be the person that knows about the Pope, but I did have to kind of explain away why I know this about the Pope, because people would be like, "Oh, this is Matt. He knows a lot about the Pope," and then people would be like, "Oh, interesting. Like, are you Catholic?" And I'd be like, "Oh, no." And then they were like, "Oh, why are you interested in this?" And I'd have to be like, "No reason." No reason, really. I have this, and I kind of made up sort of a bit of fiction about Dean. This is not actually fiction about Dean at all. I said, I have a friend who's Catholic who's really interested in the Pope, and that's kind of why I know, which is not exactly true, but it is, it's better and sort of less humiliating to say that than to explain that I have a very weird niche podcast. Okay. So I think it's probably okay.
I think for what it's worth, you have my permission to throw me under the bus at any future worker events. If you need a good cover for why you know about the Catholic Church, that's fine with me. But I will say, as a point in your favor, being the friend who knows a lot about the Pope is definitely not as cool as your position in my own life, which is the friend who knows a lot about fake ghost hunting technologies. And that's the thing that I know more about than I ever would have expected by virtue of our friendship. And I got to tell you have won on this particular game of who is the cooler kind of tangential friend.
That's great. I love winning. I'll stay winning in this one particular area of my life.
All right, let's talk about him. Pope Leo the 14th. There's been 13 before him. He chose to be another one. That name is interesting. We can talk more about it in a minute, but let's do some of the big rookie stats. As I said, he's from Chicago. People probably already know all this, but guess what? You're definitely going to know it now. It's going to be confirmed facts for you. He's from Chicago. He went to high school in Holland, Michigan, which is great news for me, a person who went to college in West Michigan. He is 69 years old. Nice. That means he's a very young pope. We'll probably have him for a while, which will be interesting. Pope Francis thought that he was only going to last a few years, but he lasted over a decade. We've had popes who've lasted for a couple decades, and always interesting to find out kind of what the length of a papal tenure allows somebody to do. What else to say? He's also a citizen of Peru. He was a missionary with the Augustinians. The Augustinians being a religious order, obviously devoted to St. Augustine, but also doing a lot of mission work around the world. That's very fascinating. So he moved to Peru, where he became a naturalized citizen. So yes, he's from the US, but he is also Peruvian. I like to call him our first Peruvian pope. I think that's a lot more fun. You can buy a Topps baseball card of him, and man, I recommend that you do. I already did. Obviously, Matt, you can have one. I bought a couple. And he's, I will say, the second pope from the Americas, Pope Francis being the first. And maybe the last bit I have on this extremely weird rookie card that I've invented is that he was, prior to becoming pope, responsible for recommending bishops to be filled, or like recommending people to fill vacant bishop seats. That's what I mean to say. And that means that he had a pretty intriguing role in the Vatican, telling Pope Francis kind of who would be a good fit for different dioceses. And in that capacity, he also led the disciplinary efforts against Bishop Strickland in Tyler, Texas, which I think we've probably talked about him on the podcast in the past, but he was basically like an openly schismatic bishop, saying that Pope Francis was leading the church into disaster and so on, and saying all kinds of wacky stuff. And pretty interesting that this guy in particular, Prevost, who is now Pope Leo, decided you probably shouldn't be able to do that and stay a bishop. So that I find pretty fascinating, given that Pope Francis was a bit wishy-washy on disciplinary stuff. So who knows if Pope Leo will continue to do that, but an interesting fact about him anyway, prior to his role in the papacy. Matt, anything I missed? What other great fun facts can we get on the table here?
I don't know if these are, well, okay. I love the Midwestern Pope. I love a Midwestern Pope. It's so great. He's out here. He's getting the big deep dish pizza. Maybe he's getting the Detroit style pizza, depending on where he's at geographically in his life. He's saying, use guys. He's got to go do the washing. Oh, man, so much great stuff. Being the Midwestern Pope. Here's something that's also great. He's from Chicago. He went to high school in Holland, Michigan. 2 different places that both have Sufjan Stevens songs written about them.
That's right. Our first Sufjan Pope.
Sufjan Pope. But that's how you know you're like truly sort of a Midwestern, is that you've lived in places where Sufjan Stevens has written extensive songs about you, about your towns. So pretty great.
Yeah, he's in Italy and people do not know what to do with him. He's asking for a deep dish pizza. They're putting 3 pizzas on top of themselves and sending that to the Vatican, hoping for the best. We'll see how his U.S. origins really change the shape of Italy. Interesting that you bring up the Midwest Pope bit. I think it's been fun to see all the memes about the Midwest Pope. It's great. There was a really great article, though, in the AP just recently, a few days ago. And the title of it is, "There's an American Pope and he's just like us. At least we really, really want him to be." And it's really cool because it's kind of a look at some of the cultural expectations around having a Pope from the United States. And it rehearses all kinds of memes. It talks about how, Jimmy Fallon, he's on late night TV talking about how there's going to be deep dish communion wafers. Pretty sure he stole that from social media. But anyway, it's all out there. He's our Pope, the Chicago Pope. And what I like about the article is it was kind of suggesting that this is a bit of a misnomer, or a kind of like U.S. American phenomenon that may not, in fact, bear itself out over the course of Leo's papacy. Both because he, of course, moved to Peru. And I think that's a piece a lot of folks in the U.S. have glossed over or lost. But also that the papacy is a weird institution that is not very reconcilable with the United States in general. And there's a really interesting comment from David Gibson, the director of the Center on Religion and Culture at Fordham University, that I'll just read here and see what you think, Matt. He says, "Our culture is one that is based on the rejection of monarchy and class distinctions, and yet it's fascinated by monarchies and those who we see as set above and apart. We want these figures to look up to, but also to sit down with. Popes want to connect with people, and the church wants that as well. But the peril is that such familiarity breeds not so much contempt as disobedience. The Pope is not your friend. He's not going to sit down and have a beer with you. If you think the Pope is your pal, will you feel betrayed when he reminds you of your religious and moral duties and chides you for failing to follow them?" I think that is definitely a being the most boring person at a party comment to make, but it also seems like kind of a useful thing to say. And I'll be curious too to find out how U.S. Americans kind of react to the ways that Leo does or doesn't fit into our expectations of him as a Chicago Midwest Pope.
Listen, I understand the point. I hear it. I'm accepting it. I'm digesting it. All kinds of things. But you got to let people have fun with this is the thing that I'm here to
Of course.
This is like the one moment where the Catholic Church has to really sort of like accept that it could be fun. And let people believe that it's fun. And I'm sorry, but if you're like, actually, this is not as fun as you think it is, that sucks. That sucks, guys. Just let it be fun. Just let it be fun for just a minute. We get it. I don't think anyone is going to think that the Pope is really a cool Chicago guy, De Beers, whatever. But just let him have fun, just for a minute. Is he really?
Yeah, I agree.
Is the Pope really considered a monarch? I've never thought of the Pope that way, but maybe that's because I'm not Catholic enough.
He is. He's a sovereign of the state of the Vatican and everything. And the cardinals are all princes of the church. So we're still addicted to that stuff around here.
That's pretty suspicious. Now that I'm hearing it out loud, that's kind of suspicious. It's not fun anymore. I don't like it. I'm not having fun.
Something I will say though about it is, when you're from the United States, you grow up as a Catholic being like, I don't know, this is like a weird thing that I do, but it's not that weird. You go to mass, but so do all your friends or your family or whatever. And the mass is kind of like a unique space. Like it's bizarre. You slow down. People say weird stuff there, but it's integrated into your life in a normal way. But one thing that is always a little uncanny or strange or foreign, I guess, is that the Pope is never from the United States, right? Like when I was growing up, it was John Paul II, who was Polish, and I was from a Polish part of Michigan, so people really liked him. But also, like, I mean, we're from Michigan. People are not Polish. So we had this weird Polish Pope, and then we had a German Pope, and then we had an Argentine Pope. And there's something kind of like, I don't know, like a global consciousness about the Vatican that intrudes into your US American space every once in a while. So when the Pope speaks, he's usually not speaking English, or when he does speak English, it's with a really strong accent and it has to be translated, or you see subtitles, all that kind of stuff. And I think that is really fascinating. You kind of have this like invasion into your your US centric consciousness that there's a world outside of that, and that a very powerful person in that world didn't come from where you came from. But seeing the Pope speak English like a U.S. American with an accent from Chicago is still pretty jarring. It is genuinely strange. Like, the strangest thing about it is that he doesn't seem that otherworldly or that different. So that's been pretty fascinating, just phenomenologically to observe in my own self, watching the Pope speak English. It kind of like, I guess it kind of takes some of the like mystery away in a strange sense of the Catholic Church, where it's just like, this is a guy who is the Pope now. And that seems really bizarre. Something I'm still getting used to, I think.
It is kind of funny to even think about that in terms of like anti-papist sentiment throughout history or something, where it's like, oh, there's this like foreign this foreign force within your religious movement that is telling you what to think and what to do and all this kind of stuff. And like statistically, that foreign force has been like an Italian guy or whatever, but now it's just like this funny American guy, and I like that a lot. I think that's great. Sort of, it's just less menacing. It's going to be a harder, the anti-popery is going to be a lot harder to sell to Americans, at least now that there's an American guy there.
Right. And also, in light of that, it was interesting when Pope Leo came out on the balcony for the first time. He spoke Spanish and Italian, and he did not speak English. And that I thought was also, I mean, who knows? Like, maybe that's a really calculated thing. Maybe it's not. He's probably swept up in the moment. But I think it is pretty interesting that he chose not to speak the global majority language in that way, or not the majority language of people, but the common language of power and commerce and politics, and also his own native tongue. And that's interesting too, because Pope Francis, for example, spoke Spanish, saying "Buena suerte," or no, "Buena sera," not good luck, good evening, when he came out on the balcony. And there's something symbolic about speaking Spanish from the balcony, and there's something symbolic about not speaking English from the balcony. So anyway, he's just like us, and also he's not in an interesting way.
Yeah, big time. I think that is. That's always going to be the interesting thing to kind of pull out about him, that he is right American. He's Midwestern, but also distinctly not in a big way. So that'd be cool to kind of keep track of throughout the papacy and how that tension plays out. Great. That's a lot of good stats and the big baseball card of the Pope. What else, Dean? What are the people within Catholicism saying about it? That's a big question, I guess. But what are the takes that you've seen so far?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's saying everything about it. Pope Leo, he's an interesting character. He doesn't have the same charisma as Pope Francis. He doesn't have the kind of drive to do something wild. When Pope Francis first became Pope, he immediately sent all kinds of signals that he was going to do something different. He wore all white. He wore a white cassock. He famously went to go pay his bill where he'd been staying in Rome by himself. He was just kind of like wandering around, being a real Pope of the people. Pope Leo has not done those things, and we'll say more about that in a minute, maybe. But I think there's something interesting about the fact that he's not at least so far, not a super extroverted like media character in the way that Francis was. And I think that that has allowed people to project basically whatever they want onto him. So for those who are more progressive, I think people are looking for, rightly, the signs of continuity with Francis, which Pope Leo has explicitly said that he's in continuity with what Francis was doing. People have been saying too that his name Leo is indicative of a kind of social justice tradition, and he himself also said that. So he confirmed that the choice of Leo was to kind of reach back into the tradition of Catholic social teaching and identify Pope Leo the 13th, who had written Rerum Novarum, the encyclical that kind of kicked off Catholic social teaching. Some people have also called attention to kind of a funny, I don't know if this is a coincidence or not, but Leo is also the name of one of St. Francis's closest friends in the Franciscan story, and kind of carried on Francis's legacy after he died. So maybe there's some cool symbolic stuff there. So all that's going on. Progressives are looking for reasons to like him, I guess. On the other side, conservatives too, I think, are trying to find either things to complain about or things to feel hopeful about, hopeful in their own way. He, as I said, did not come out in the white cassock. He came out in more traditional papal clothes, which conservatives like. He's not coming out saying, like, I don't know, he's going to enact some wild agenda of reform. He himself stressed that he wants a church of unity and that he would not rule like an autocrat, which is what conservatives had accused Francis of doing, even though he wasn't. And I'm sure Leo doesn't think that either, but that's clearly an overture toward that concern. So, yeah, I mean, it's not that he hasn't said anything, and I picked out that we can talk about later something he did say, which I really liked. But he is, like, maybe not a completely blank screen on which to project whatever we think, but, he's not, like, he's not running around the way Francis did, being like, wait till I do something next. We're not, like, getting headlines about Pope Leo every single day, except by journalists whose job it is to kind of, like, find a story and make it. Francis was creating the story. Leo is, just being himself, I guess.
Yeah, it is very interesting. Man, talking about him like he's like about the ways that people are projecting things onto him is right. I've seen a lot of very bizarre takes where people are saying, everything. My favorite so far has been there's a podcast I listen to called Knowledge Fight, and it's a podcast that just talks about Alex Jones and InfoWars. Anyway, so there was an episode a few weeks ago where Alex Jones is like, he interrupts his own show to then cut to like Fox News footage of the white smoke going up, and then Alex Jones realizing suddenly in the midst of all this that he doesn't actually know anything about Catholicism, and he definitely does not know anything about this new like obscure pope that no one's heard of. He just starts asking ChatGPT questions about him, and he comes to the conclusion extremely quickly that he's a woke pope. He's the part of the globalist agenda. So pretty cool. Pretty cool thing to say immediately about somebody when you know absolutely nothing. But anyways, one more projection from the people on the right. Whatever. Alex Jones is obviously an idiot, and that's an indisputable fact. But what is not indisputable is that people on the right, I guess, will probably continue saying that about him for his entire papacy.
Yeah, exactly. There was an interesting interview with Cardinal Michael Czerny, who has been the head of the Dicastery for Integral Human Development, also a Canadian guy with his own history in Latin America. So he had this interview with America Magazine very recently, and there was a good question, which was sort of calling attention to the fact that Leo, he's doing a lot in continuity with Francis, but also these things that are not in continuity, including the kind of stylistic choices that I just mentioned, wearing the more traditional clothing. He gave the blessing in Latin to journalists, all that kind of stuff. And the interviewer here, Jerry O'Connell, says, "What would you say to those who don't read the speeches and say that this is a kind of new Benedict, being the speeches where Leo is, I don't know, articulating his own agenda?" Czerny says this: "First of all, I think it's marvelous that we have this new pope from the Americas. This excites so much joy, so much interest all over the world, which is truly great. He also says, this is not the really difficult church 15 years ago. This is a church full of life and hope. So that's wonderful. So that's interesting anyway, reflecting on the Benedict thing, a bit of, I don't know. I won't speak for Journey, but reflecting a different situation. But he says, I don't know Prevost, now Pope Leo, very well, so I can't speak with great conviction, but I suspect that these are individual particular choices. I don't think he's the kind of man who sends coded messages. I think he makes his choices based on what the situation is. And if we really want to understand what each of these choices means, then we have to ask the question in 3 or 6 months or a year, when we look back and say, in the first 3 days, he hinted in this direction, or he hinted toward that sort of thing. And then he also added that he feels like it's a kind of reconciling gesture to, make these other choices. But I thought that was interesting, too, to be like, this isn't a person sending coded messages. He's just like I said, a guy, a guy making choices, trying to have a unified kind of church and embrace his role as the Pope. And also, it seems to me kind of getting used to what it means to be a Pope. I mean, nobody expected him to become the Pope. You can't imagine that he expected it either. So I think he's kind of feeling it out, sorting it out over time. But I thought that was an intriguing observation from Cherney that, we'll have to find out what he thinks the papacy is like in retrospect.
Right. Yeah, that sounds good. Well, let's go from intriguing observation from somebody who knows what they're talking about to a a weird take from the fringe from someone who most assuredly doesn't really know that much what they're talking about. This is an article from the European Conservative from Rod Dreher, a fave of the show. This article is titled "A Yank on the Throne of St. Peter." Great. This article is...
Can we just pause there? Because
I
hate that.
Okay.
Here's why. Yes, is he from the United States? For sure. But he is a Peruvian, as I mentioned. And I think people are wrongly seeing him as a pope from the United States and ought to see him as a pope from Peru. He was a bishop in Chiclayo, a very small diocese in Peru, full of indigenous parishioners in particular. And apparently, he was very invested in that diocese, in that people. And he himself has said in speeches so far that he was an immigrant himself, and he was an expatriate, that he left his home and took on another home. So just to say, he's not a Yank on the throne of St. Peter. He's a Peruvian on the throne of St. Peter who happened to be born in the United States. All right, I'm going to get off that high horse. But
no, it's a good high horse to remain upon. Ride that horse for as long as you can. It's a good high horse to remain on because this is something that Rod Dreher cannot quite understand, and I'm sure this will end up being a pretty huge, misunderstanding in the Pope watching community. It's like throughout this article, Rod Dreher is trying to figure out exactly how Pope Leo is going to sort of balance his more liberal Catholicism with a a tolerance, he thinks, for conservative Catholics in the US. And it's super bizarre because it's super bizarre because the only way that Rod Dreher sees Pope Leo as sort of diverging from, not the only way that he's diverging from US Catholicism, but he sees that the not American parts of his Catholicism and the liberal parts of his Catholicism as sort of being the same thing, which is very bizarre. Right. So the thing that Dreher keeps pointing out, the big rub over and over again that Rod Dreher is stating and overstating, is that Pope Leo is going to be sort of a pro-immigrant pope, which, yeah, probably, given sort of his life experience, that makes a lot of sense to assume. But Rod Dreher thinks that he'll have to constantly be tempering that pro-immigration feeling with sort of other things to sate U.S. conservative Catholics so that there's still some kind of acceptance or whatever amongst traditionalists. Well, let me read this thing from Rod Dreher and it'll kind of get the point across. I hate to do it. I hate to read Rod Dreher on the show, but sometimes you gotta do it. So Rod writes, Leo will almost certainly be a liberal, but perhaps his liberalism will include tolerance for a relatively small sect within the church that wants nothing more than to be faithful and to worship according to the old mass. Yeah, they want nothing more than that. That's all they want, which is why it's not, not scandalous at all. No one's making a big fuss about these people. Okay, sorry. Though most U.S. conservative Catholics are not Latin mass goers, if the new pontiff takes a more welcoming line to traditionalists and holds the line on issues like abortion, euthanasia, gender ideology, he'll go far in winning over U.S. Catholic conservatives and gaining a fairer hearing for his views on immigration. So maybe if Pope Leo is sort of there's a reconciliation he can do between these two people, and maybe like he can get a little if he gives a little, is basically Rod Dreher's take. Then he goes on. This is sort of the conclusion of the article. Francis was known for his hostility to the United States and the role of America in the world, and he showed it. And that's why we like him.
Was not. First of all.
I know. Yeah, totally. Exactly. Rod continues. His gentler successor is an American who has lived most of his life and served as a priest and bishop outside of America. Whatever may be coming from this Yankee pontificate, Americans can at least expect no more unwelcome splashes of Buenos Aires vinegar and more spoonfuls of Chicago honey, which should make any hard-to-swallow Leonine medicine go down more smoothly with the church's richest and most influential... No, I can't... yeah, Dean, tell me what you think about that exactly.
Oh man, the prose is so bad. It's just reading somebody who wants to hear themselves talk.
Big
I
time.
can't handle it.
Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah, it's rough. I mean, whatever. Like I just said, I do think that Pope Leo, it sounds like, he's making overtures to try to signal that he wants to have a reconciliation with conservatives who felt like they were, maligned by the Francis papacy. I don't know. To the extent that will be possible, who can say? I do think Leo is probably doing that. I think it's probably naive to assume that's going to happen. At the end of the day, they're going to accuse him of being a woke Marxist pope regardless.
Big time.
That's just how conservatives work. Like, I mean, these particular conservatives, the point is not to understand what's going on. It's to like be mad. Being mad is the structure of it. And if you can't be mad, then I don't know, you can't be that kind of conservative. So I think that is naive for Rod Dreher also to be like, if he gives a little, he'll get a little. I mean, that's just wishful thinking. Rod Dreher is trying to pretend that he's a good pundit, I guess.
Yeah.
That I find frustrating. I also think, again, this idea that Pope Francis was like uniquely hostile to the US or that he was splashing Buenos Aires vinegar or whatever is so absurd. Like Francis tolerated a lot of nonsense from the United States. And the irony is, as I just mentioned, it was Prevost, now Pope Leo, who disciplined Strickland. Francis probably, I think, wouldn't have done that. I don't suspect that Leo is going to have the same amount of patience as Francis on certain issues, especially in the United States. We know that he had been openly critical of J.D. Vance, for example, on social media prior to becoming the Pope. He is a person who, I don't know, will probably have to modulate his opinion now that he's the Pope and figure out what it means to be a diplomat. But I think it is important to recognize that, like, I don't know, the idea that Francis was out there creating division and now Pope Leo is going to like heal that is such a silly story. And one that also Rod Dreher is not the only person responsible for pushing. It's even come out, there was like a Reuters article right after the Pope made a few speeches that was suggesting the same thing, that he's like, really working overtime to bring the conservatives back into the fold, which is just not true. Like, no good faith reading of the speech that they had commented on would lead you to that conclusion. So, I don't know. I'm sure Pope Leo wants to make conservatives feel welcome in the church, and I'm sure that he also has his own conservative opinions. I don't suspect Pope Leo is going to be like, unfortunately, I don't suspect he's going to say, trans people are fully welcome and affirmed in the Catholic Church. Like, that's not something I see on the horizon. But I don't think he's going to get rewarded by, like, J.D. Vance or other U.S. conservative Catholics who are then going to throw him a bone and be like, We shouldn't, I don't know, send migrants to prison in El Salvador or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I think that all makes sense. That is the correct response. The other thing that I think is kind of bizarre about Rod's take is that he has like an overdetermined vision of how important he like traditionalist Catholics in the United States like actually are, I think, globally, because they're just like not like that is not the majority of Catholicism, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
It's viewing like a really small minority as being, I think, more important than they really are or something, or having more power to sort of like sway things one way or the other. The idea that you would have to, give a little to get a little or something from this group of people is, I think, a weird misstep in the first place. I don't know. Like politically, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think that's right. Let's turn to talk a little bit about what his actual agenda might look like. And we do have some seeds of that starting to emerge. He gave a speech pretty early on in May, I guess it was the 17th. It was an address to members of the Centesimus Annus Pro Pontifice Foundation. So, I don't know. They sound pretty important. Who knows? I couldn't tell you anything about them. But in the speech, he had what I thought was a really interesting reading about doctrine. In it, he talks about Catholic social teaching. And as I mentioned, he had already confirmed that he chose his papal name in response to, or as like an echo of Pope Leo the 13th. And in this speech, he says that you have the opportunity to show that the Church's social doctrine, with its specific anthropological approach, seeks to encourage genuine engagement with social issues. It does not claim to possess a monopoly on the truth, either in its analysis of problems or its proposal of concrete solutions. Where social questions are concerned, knowing how best to approach them is more important than providing immediate responses to why things happen or how to deal with them. The aim is to learn how to confront problems, for these are always different since every generation is new and faces new challenges, dreams, and questions. That, to me, sounds like Pope Francis stuff, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
He goes on to say, there's a fundamental aspect of our attempts to build a culture of encounter through dialogue and social friendship. For many of our contemporaries, the word dialogue and doctrine can seem incompatible. Perhaps when we hear the word doctrine, we tend to think of a set of ideas belonging to a religion. The word itself makes us feel disposed to reflect, call things into question, or seek new alternatives. In the case of the Church's social doctrine, we need to make clear that the word doctrine has another more positive meaning, without which dialogue itself would be meaningless. Doctrine can be a synonym of science, discipline, and knowledge. Understood in this way, doctrine appears as the product of research, and hence of hypotheses, discussions, progress, and setbacks, all aimed at conveying a reliable, organized, and systematic body of knowledge about a given issue. Consequently, a doctrine is not the same as an opinion, but is rather a common, collective, and even multidisciplinary pursuit of truth. And then this is maybe the cherry on top of it all. Indoctrination is immoral. It stifles critical judgment and undermines the sacred freedom of conscience, even if erroneous. It resists new notions and rejects movement, change, or the evolution of ideas in the face of new problems. Doctrine, on the other hand, as a serious, serene, and rigorous discourse, aims to teach us primarily how to approach problems, and even more importantly, how to approach people. It also helps us to make prudential judgment when confronted with challenges. Seriousness, rigor, and serenity are what we must learn from every doctrine, including the Church's social doctrine. So, two big things I wanted to pull out here. One is, I think this is such an interesting way to think about doctrine as the product of, an organized body of knowledge that can make progress and can also be wrong and needs to be sorted out and is the product of hypotheses and so on. That, I think, is very cool, very interesting, something liberation theology has also talked quite a lot about. The second thing is saying that indoctrination undermines the sacred freedom of conscience, even if erroneous, I think is such an important clause. Like, your conscience can even be wrong when resisting a doctrine, and nevertheless, you have the freedom to be wrong based on that conscientious judgment. And I think that is, something that has always been true of Catholic social teaching. Like, it's in our catechism that there's a primacy of conscience. But affirming that your conscience can even be wrong and you can, resist a doctrine or, I guess, not be convinced by it or whatever, I think is such an important thing for the Pope to say right off the bat. And that, to me, is a sign of, encouragement that when Pope Leo is talking about dialogue, he is, it seems to me anyway, really opening up space for people to sort it out. And there are lots of things in the church that need to be sorted out. So anyway, I found all that very encouraging.
Nice. Yeah, I think that sounds really interesting. Definitely not as inflexible and sort of like immovable as you would imagine doctrine of something doctrine of the Catholic Church being. So pretty neat.
Yeah, so they're going to get our hypotheses, Matt. We got to submit them to the big scientific laboratory in the Vatican of Doctrine.
Submitting this, my hypothesis about like God being a big piece of cheese or something, just to the lab. I got to bring this over. I've got it written down. The moon's made of cheese. There are worms in the moon. I'm referencing something and I can't remember exactly what it is.
It's The Cheese and the Worms by
thank
Carlo
you.
Ginzburg.
Yeah, exactly. That. So anyways, we should probably put that back in the lab, put it under the microscope, the theological microscope, if you will. Great. That's very cool. I'm glad you pulled it out. Something I've been thinking. This is a bad transition towards something else. So brace yourself. Something I've been thinking a lot about as people have been, I don't know, pulling things out about Pope Leo, whether they're good things or bad things, is like, what is his track record with regard to victims of abuse, that kind of thing. Something that I guess I'm interested in. I'm not Catholic, but I'm interested in people not doing bad things. That's my take. Anyways, so immediately after he became Pope, there was I think a lot of question about this and a lot of sort of half reporting and people kind of pulling together things without maybe having a full view of the story. This is not me being an apologist for him. This is just my experience of searching around the internet and only finding sort of half stories knitted together and not exactly being sure what to make of them, and nobody else really being sure either. That was my experience. Maybe other people have different ones, but that is what it was like in the moments after he became Pope for me. Anyways, there's a new article that I found this week that is from AP. It's called "As Pope Leo Faces Scrutiny, Victims of abusive Catholic groups say he helped when others didn't." So anyways, an interesting story about some of his track record as a bishop, at least. I'm going to read a little bit of this and then I'll kind of explain some of the bigger picture ideas behind it, because it is an adjacent story to this podcast, which I think is actually very interesting. But also trigger warning, because there is some not description, but there's a conversation about sexual violence, which is not great. So anyways, skip ahead if that's not something you want to hear. So this is from AP, like I said a minute ago. Pope Leo made plenty of enemies, helping dismantle a powerful Catholic movement whose leaders physically, sexually, spiritually, and psychologically abused members. As Leo's past record of handling clergy sexual abuse cases comes under scrutiny, victims of the now disgraced group are stepping up to defend his record. So this is back in 2018 when he was not Pope Leo. He was Robert Prevost, a bishop in Peru, before all this went down. So anyways, in this role, he listened to a handful of survivors. He took the claims that they made against this organization seriously. He got the Vatican involved, and then basically he got the organization disciplined and they were dismantled as an organization. Here's the connection to our podcast, though. So the organization that was under scrutiny, that Prevost did have a hand in sort of defeating in a big way, is, okay, it's Latin, so I'll probably say it wrong. Sodalitium Christianae Vitae. This is a extreme this is a pretty right-wing Catholic lay organization that was founded in the 70s, and it was founded in Peru, by the way, important. And they're sort of community-based. It's a community-based movement that was sort of influential in Peru, but there were sort of other organizations throughout Latin America. And like I said, it is a lay community, so there's not vows. This isn't people necessarily in the church, but it was a real Catholic organization. But it was created directly in response to liberation theology. So it is it's a right-wing Catholic social movement is what I'm trying to describe here. And right. Yeah, I mean, sort of in right-wing in the phalangist sense. So in the worst way you can be a right-wing Catholic person in the 1970s. Anyways, I would urge you, I'll urge you to go read the actual article, and I'll put the article in the show notes and you can kind of get into some of the depth of it. But it is a really cool story. Robert Prevost did help a handful of people and listen to their stories, and faced his own sort of slander and persecution from the leaders of this group. But he played a big role in getting them dismantled, taken apart, disciplined. Love to see it. So that is not to say that like this is a perfect story or that like he did everything exactly right. Some contend that he did not, and that is, fair, a fair criticism to bring against him. All that to say, it is an interesting moment though, where you can kind of see some of his character as an actual bishop and like what it actually looks like for him to be a person in power within Catholicism. So worth checking out more if that is a topic that is near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, just by virtue of my life and job and so on, I am signed up for many, many email alerts about things happening in the Catholic Church. And over the last few years, I have gotten lots of alerts about this process over time. There's tons of reporting on it if you really want to read. And, whatever, you kind of just keep up with that stuff, but I never took the time to like go into detail with it. And I did find myself asking every once in a while, like, why the fixation on Peru in particular, and why kind of look into this group. There are many groups in Latin America similar to this one. And now it makes more sense because they had a particular advocate in the Vatican who was trying to sort that out. So I think that's really fascinating. And again, as you said, like, it's not like that excuses anything else that he's done or whatever or didn't do. I don't know. But it is a kind of unique story about active discipline of a particular lay movement, which I think is great and important to see. Cool that he's taking that on board, and I'll be curious to find out also how he kind of cleans up the rest of what's going on in the Catholic Church, and that he's inheriting a system of abuse and corruption as the Catholic Church has always been. So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, big time. Really interesting. A big interesting thing to see sort of unfold. And we'll see, I'm sure, more stuff come about this story in the future.
Last item on the list of things to talk about here. The Pope has signaled that he wants to talk about artificial intelligence. In a speech, he said that he was going to address what he called another industrial revolution of AI. The Vatican has put out its own document about AI while Pope Francis was still alive. There was a dicastery, I can't remember which, or maybe it was an Academy of Sciences, I can't remember. Anyway, there's a Vatican document floating around about AI, and it's pretty good. I think people should read it. A lot of good content about what intelligence even is, how it works. So I think we can expect the Pope to build on that kind of thing, extend it, and fascinating that he signaled right off the bat that that was a major concern for his papacy. At the same time, there has been a lot of wild fake news about Pope Leo since he became the Pope, including that produced by AI. I'll turn that over to you, Matt, to talk about in a second, I guess, here.
Yeah.
But one thing I have found really fascinating about Pope Leo is maybe in part because he's this screen of projection. There's been a ton of fake news floating around of like quotes that he didn't say or progressive overtures that would be like nice for a pope to say, but he definitely didn't. And I've seen it shared by dozens of people on my social media. Also people who I would have expected to be a little more discerning, I guess, about what they're sharing. I think people are just desperate to like hear a pope say certain things, which is maybe telling in itself. But anyway, fascinating to see that a pope who announced he's going to take on AI and fake news or whatever is already finding himself at the center of it.
Love it. Love the anti-AI pope. It's pretty good. Yeah, it has been a lot of stuff posted about him with that is like a product of generative AI. So very interesting. There's an article from NCR Online that talks about a YouTube video that was kind of making the rounds. That is pretty bizarre. Anyways, yeah, the article is called "Faith in Deepfakes: Pope Leo XIV in the Age of AI," and kind of talks about some of the stuff you mentioned a minute ago, Dean, about the papal document about AI, but also about what Pope Leo thinks about it himself. But yeah, it starts off with this kind of like fantastical story about how there's this, an AI YouTube video that was making the rounds on social media, and the the YouTube video is entitled Pope's Wake Up Urgent Call to a True... I'm sorry. Pope's Wake Up Call... Nope. It's so hard. Pope's Wake Up Urgent Call to All True Christians, Pope Leo XIV Speech. And it was posted on a channel called Pope Leo XIV Sermons. So someone's got that very valuable real estate already. And the video, I've watched a few seconds of it. I'm obviously not going to watch more than that. That's silly. But the video is 42 minutes long, and it's like an AI generated voice that is sort of like supposed to sound like Pope Leo, and it's just like unhinged. It's unhinged. But there's just like, sort of like lots of apocalyptic language and sort of like spooky, scary things. And it's not that like it. I have a hard time even like getting excited about the spooky, scary things because it's like it's AI generated, so it's just like such unhinged nonsense. It's just like it's nothing.
It's not fun
nothing at all.
It's just like something people like burned up a pond in order to make a robot say.
yeah, exactly. And I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to tell you what it says. Don't even go watch the video. It's not worth it. But anyways, it is very stupid. It's very silly. The article notes, however, at the time of its publication, that the channel has 13,000 subscribers, which is way too many, and the video had over 230,000 views. So like a lot of people have seen this thing, which sucks.
But they're all robots. That's the comforting.
I mean, it's very possible that could be the case. At least I was not a robot, and as far as you know, but so whatever, 230,000 views, but at least one of them was me, so that's something. Yeah, really interesting stuff. Later in the article, it kind of mentions some of the stuff that Pope Francis has said about AI, and his particular position towards it, and also some of the things that Pope Leo is saying about it as well. And it's great. I don't know. In the article, it says Pope Leo XIV seems aware that we are just at the beginning of a new AI revolution, and we must be prepared for it. In his May 12th address to the media, Leo remarked that artificial intelligence, with its immense potential, which nevertheless requires responsibility and discernment in order to ensure it can be used for the good of all, so that it can benefit all of humanity. This is sort of like the the safe take that that Pope Leo is giving. That people have been quoting this part, but there's like I think more critical vibes to it as well. The thing the thing that makes me actually really suspicious about the way that Pope Leo has talked about AI, but also the way that Pope Francis has talked about it, and the Vatican document too, is that I think that generative AI is like overpromising what it can actually give you for sure. And like I think that even saying that there's a new AI industrial revolution heading our way or something is just like kind of eye rolling, because no, there isn't. I mean, it will be, it's going to be integrated into everything, but I think to say it's going to be like the industrial revolution seems not correct to me, and maybe inflating the importance of what we have in terms of generative AI. Like the revolution that's coming is one where it's imposed by bosses downward for the detriment of everybody. And maybe that's different than sort of changing the way that things are produced en masse or something. But I think that it's a little bit overblown.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I mean, I do think also if you read the Vatican document on it, in some ways they maybe lean a little too uncritically into the fact that, or the idea that AI is going to upend everything, all our labor and so on. But they do, like, they parse out, for example, the different kinds of AI, and they recognize too that like we shouldn't just call everything AI, and that doesn't make any sense. And I think that's actually the most valuable piece. Like they talk about generative AI specifically in the document, and my favorite thing about it is they spend a lot of time discussing the term intelligence itself, and like what would it even mean to use that term to talk about a variety of things. That like intelligence isn't just like whatever combining a bunch of information, but involves a lot more than that. So all that to say, I think that they're alive to a bit more of a nuanced position, but it's true that, I mean, the minute you're like, I don't know, the whole world's going to be changed just by virtue of this like inevitable intelligence, you're already wrong. Already wrong.
I think so too. Yeah. So I don't know if I don't know what people will know or have seen in the world by the time this is published later this week, but in the last few days, there's been a lot of big news about this thing called Google VO3, which is a new AI video generator that Google has rights to, and it's pretty astonishing in its results. The videos that it creates are pretty wild, and I think if you looked at them, you'd be like, "Wow, this is something. You'd be more astounded than what I've just given you there. But there's a type of realism to the videos that it produces that I think is surprising. That is not been present in sort of like former iterations of AI video. I don't know. I'm sure people have seen like this. There's like this sort of classic AI video of Will Smith eating spaghetti where it's just like insane and, horrifying. This is like far better than that. Sorry. All I'm trying to say is that like, to me, it feels much less like a new sort of like paradigmatic moment in history and the way things are produced or whatever. And just more like, it's less Marx, more Virilio. This is the information bomb. This is not the Industrial Revolution. This is like somebody who makes slop for a living is like going to get very horny for this stuff. Not necessarily like someone in the coal mines or whatever. Sorry, this is a completely incomprehensible reference or simile, unless you like are deep in the minds of this show in particular. But yeah, anyways, that's my take. More Virilio, less Marx is the effect this will have on the world.
Yeah, maybe a good reminder that we should go back to Virilio for a while, but definitely not today for sure. Man, all that though, all the discussion does make me also feel like we should sign off this episode with a complaint, which is that, man, ever since Pope Francis died and now that Pope Leo is the Pope, there have been so many AI images generated of both of them, like doing particular things. So it'll be like Pope Francis meeting Saint Francis, or like Pope Leo surrounded by kids in Gaza or something. Like, I don't know, like just images. And they all have that like weird yellow tinge or whatever. I don't know, I'm colorblind, but you know the color that I'm talking about. The kind of thing where like, this is definitely AI. And in addition to that, people have been making that same kind of style AI images of like scenes in the Bible. And it's so crazy to me because it's like, out of all the things that you definitely could find a very free, high quality image, first of all, scenes from Christian history are plentiful. It's literally the one thing that we've spent a lot of time making in various styles across the centuries. We definitely don't need to pour out bottles of water to make more of them. And the second thing is on the popes. It's so wild to me that you wouldn't like pause and just think for a second, like maybe Pope Francis wouldn't want you to like tell ChatGPT to make an image of him, or I don't know. It's just like so strange. So anyway, I hope that in Pope Leo's forthcoming big encyclical about AI, he says, please don't make any pictures of me. That's my one big hope.
Yeah, that'd be great. He's out here talking about, how you can have sort of a difference in a difference in conscience and sort of disagree with doctrine. But I think in some places, the doctrine just needs to tell you, don't even do it. Don't bother. Please don't.
That's right. It's an age of iconoclasm. That's what I'm prepared for.
Let's smash those idols. Let's get out there.
Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/themagnificast. Because believe it or not, this whole podcast is made by two actual people who will use your money to do things like, I don't know, donate to the British Museum, the Bone Church of Richard Dawkins. If you support us on Patreon, you can also join our Discord where we're talking about all kinds of stuff. Man, it's been very busy this weekend talking about many things that I won't say on this podcast, but you can guess what they are if you watch the news. You can join the conversation there. It's been really great to see people working out what's going on in the world these days. Our music is by Maria Armstrong. The outro is by The Illogical Spoon, and we'll see you next week.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night. mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early. Beside, what else are you gonna do? As we kissed in the alley by the Michigan Theater, fall snow was glowing in the lights of the downtown. Saw a spark in your eyes, I just spoke it. Said we're gonna turn this whole place upside down. Then you said, my dear, do you really mean this? I said, I only know what I feel right now. I said, poets lie, sometime come true. Stay awake with me, where see what we can do. Poets lie, sometime come true. Stay awake with me, where see what we can do in my town. I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. This the kind of town folks get stuck in. Yeah, people get stuck here, but I chose to stay. If you ever want to know something or know someplace, you just can't know them all. At some point you must make a choice and choose someplace and make a home. There was a time not long ago when we'd look out this window and see a wolf pack running free. Except there'd be no window or this building separating us from all the life we see. Behold, the Lord makes all things new, and that sounds good, I want to do it too. Oh dear God, destroy my city, make it a place that wolves think pretty. So when I come back here and stay, I want to hear them howl someday. In my lifetime, in my place, before my body's down in the grave. Before my body's down in the grave, in my place. I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, church in